Welcome everybody. This is a seminar being run by Green Energy Net, which our stand is over here. Green Energy Net, in case you didn't know, is an online magazine and community. We pride ourselves on neutrality and independence, and as such we've tried to bring a panel together today of some of the leading providers of power purchase agreements, how you get the best deal for your power. So this seminar today is really for anyone that is currently a generator or indeed thinking of becoming one. And it's really on the back of an article that we wrote actually in collaboration with a number of the people on the panel around selling your power, which we published a few weeks ago. And there's going to be a follow-up to that. So if you're interested in this whole area and you want to read about perhaps the issues in a bit more detail, then please go onto the website afterwards when you get home and have a read of these articles, because they flesh out some of the issues that we're only going to be able to touch upon a little bit today over the next hour. But I'm very pleased to have brought the three gentlemen on my right hand. Ian Robertson, immediately to my right from SmartestEnergy, Tim Foster from StatKraft in the middle, and Simon Proctor from Good Energy on the far right. And all of them would be in a position, I think they would say, to purchase your power if you are interested. And I'm going to let them just highlight the sort of offerings that they provide. So, Ian, would you like to start?
Thanks very much, John. I'm Ian Robertson from SmartestEnergy. SmartestEnergy is a licensed electricity supplier. We are not a generator ourselves, so we're an asset-light company. So what we do is we buy electricity from independent generators. By that we mean non-utility owned, and we sell it on to end users. We are exclusively in the half-hourly metered market, which normally means anything from 100 kilowatts and above. That's from a generation and a consumer point of view. So we're only in the sort of medium and large-scale commercial market. The company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Marubeni Corporation of Japan, so they're a financial backer. We have last year we had an annual turnover of £1.1 billion. So it's a fairly large volume, high volume, low margin business, and it requires that sort of financial backing behind us. We have offices in London, in Ipswich, and also in Glasgow, servicing the Scottish power purchase market. So in terms of where we are, we reckon that we currently have about we buy the electricity from 10% of all current live GB renewable generation. We currently trade with an installed portfolio of about 2 gigawatts in total capacity. That's made up of 600 different sites. So if you do your arithmetic, our average site size is about 3.5 megawatts. But we do have a very, very large range within that. So the smallest site we buy from is 100 kilowatts. As I mentioned, we buy power from sites right up to 90 megawatts on the renewable side. So we deal with all commercial scale renewable technologies in power purchase. There is also a concentration here on the FIT market in particular. So we're a voluntary feed-in tariff supplier. Sort of sides of projects that are our core business are very much in the FIT scale. And we reckon that at the moment we probably deal with the FIT supplier for about 30% of all non-domestic feed-in tariff capacity. That's just something just over 100 megawatts. So our product there is we pay the FIT generation tariff, but we also provide a PPA product, which gives an uplift on the basic export tariff in order to improve the financial returns to FIT scale generators. So just briefly on the product side, long and short-term PPAs, in particular PPAs that are project financeable, and feed-in tariffs as well. Those are the core products we'll probably want to talk about today. Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Tim Foster from StatKraft. StatKraft are the Norwegian state-owned utility company. State power is the translation, which sort of gives it away a bit. We've been active in the UK over the last 10 years, came in initially as an energy trader, but have progressively developed our own assets, wind and hydro, both on and offshore wind. And as a consequence of having the platforms to trade our own output, we entered into the energy supply market about 2.5 years ago as a PPA provider and also a licensed half-hourly supplier. So very similar to Ian, we deal with industrial commercial customers and generation with a half-hourly meter. As said, we really started offering PPAs to the market 2 years ago. We have about 500-600 megawatts now of PPAs with us, all of which are wind, biomass and hydro. What sets us perhaps slightly differently from the market that Ian deals with, we've closed about 70% of the project finance projects last year, and that's really based on the background of StatKraft being a strong utility player, basically an A credit, and therefore when banks are lending to projects, they're looking at the strength of the off-taker. So that's really what differentiates us. We're quite willing to offer 15-year agreements. Those agreements have floor prices and such like. What makes me slightly uneasy in this company is that we do not do feed-in tariff projects, and simply because we haven't got the supply portfolio necessary to back it up. We're reliant on the projects, and what we end up generally doing is recommending or referring generators to come to us with feed-in tariffs to the two colleagues either side. I think the 5 megawatt barrier was mentioned earlier. We found in our experience to date that basically anybody developing a hydro project goes feed-in tariff. Anybody developing an AD project goes feed-in tariff, no matter what the size is, up to the 5 megawatts. Where we do see a bit of a break point is wind, and we've done a number of PPAs under the renewable obligation for wind sites at just over 1 megawatt. And also what we're seeing at the moment is large solar arrays and a lot of biomass projects coming through and being financed under the RO. A lot of background for that is really due to the changes in the government's policy on solar particularly, and concerns from the banks who are funding these projects about future changes to the feed-in tariff rates. So that's really our background as we come from. So hopefully there'll be one or two questions that aren't entirely feed-in tariff specific. Otherwise I'll be referring to two gentlemen on either side again. Anyway, thank you.
My name is Simon. I'm from Good Energy. To give you a quick introduction to Good Energy, Good Energy is an electricity supplier in the UK. What makes us slightly different, I suppose, is that we only sell electricity to the grid that's been generated from renewable sources. So we're an independent supplier in the UK, and we currently supply around 30,000 domestic and business customers in the UK. So because we need to supply our customers with renewable energy, energy procurement and sourcing renewables is a big part of what we do. We're also a FIT supplier, a FIT provider, and we currently work with 35,000 independent renewable generators in the UK, on all different scales really. So with regards to export propositions, different ways you can get money for your export, we offer three main propositions. So through the FIT we can provide the deemed export route, which is for any generators under 30 kilowatts. We also have a scheme that we call SmartGen, which is really aimed at the 10 to 80 kilowatt market. It basically provides a payback for generators exporting to the grid above the guaranteed rate of 3.1. It's more in line with the actual market rate, so a bit higher than what you'd get on the guaranteed rate. And then for any generators above 80 kilowatts, we offer power purchase agreements from around 80 kilowatts to 20 megawatts, where kind of like these guys, we work with all different types of generators, all different technologies.
Okay, thank you, Simon. We've got a series of questions here. I just thought maybe I could clarify the issue around opting in and opting out. These are terms that you may have heard of around this whole area, and maybe be slightly less familiar with. unfortunately for Tim, this is generally at the smaller scale of operation. But if you register for the feed-in tariff, many people, particularly smaller generators, will opt in, and for the power there is an estimation called deeming, which is essentially assume that 50% of the power that you generate is exported to the grid, and you get paid for that 50%. So ideally, you really want to be consuming more than 50%, because then you get paid for the 50% plus the extra bit that you actually consume. But there is also an option, even right from the start of your project, to opt out. And for many people over a certain scale of project, and even that scale of project, for example, in wind, might be around the 10 kilowatt scale, it may be worth you opting out. And in which case, when you opt out, you're effectively paid for all the energy that you export, the exact amount that you export. But in order to do that, you need an export meter, and as Ian pointed out with his half-hourly metering, actually installing and maintaining an export meter is something that is charged to you and incurs a cost. And really the question that we've debated with the panel in the past is, at what point is it worth you opting out, taking the extra cost of having your export meter and maintaining your export meter, but actually being paid for everything that you export to the grid. And the dilemma for some people, particularly at the smallest end, is whether they should opt in or opt out. And we've had a number of case studies with providers of 100 kilowatt wind projects who felt the extra hassle of opting out from year one onwards, right from the start of their project, has actually not been worth it. Their recommendation is opt in for year one, opt out from year two if that's what you want to do. That's the feedback they've given us. There is more administration, some additional technology, the export meters that need to be fitted, and they felt that that extra hassle factor was not worth it, and they would rather have taken the 3.1p rather than the possible 5 point something or even more for exporting their energy if they opt out. So that's actually the opt-in, opt-out dilemma is something that we can raise with the panel. And in fact, I don't know, Ian can probably clarify this, but actually you can sort of flip-flop as well by opting in one year and then opting out the next and then opting back in. Is that right, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. The option to opt out or opt in of export tariff, you can do it no more often than once every 12 months. So if you opt out of the tariff, you're out for at least 12 months. Opt back in, you're back in for at least 12 months. It's one of the issues that we tried to deal with when we structured the long-term project financial PPA for a FIT as well. But if you've got a long-term PPA, say for 10 years, which is what the bank is wanting, but you're only really fixing the price for the first 2 or 3 years because of market liquidity, won't let you go any further beyond that. What happens at the back end if the wholesale price should crash below the export tariff floor? So we designed a product that allows the two to interface fairly well without breaking the PPA. So it's a slightly longer answer than you required to your question, but hopefully useful.
I guess all I'm trying to establish is that there's actually 3 options. You can opt in, opt out, or take effectively a contract that allows you to opt in, then opt out, then opt out back in again. So there's a sort of hybrid option as well. And certainly I know that Smartest offer that sort of degree of flexibility with one of the products that they offer. Okay, so I'm just going to start the questions, and then other people, we've got a roving microphone, so I'll just invite questions. But I wonder if the panel could say any more about effectively who are the key people who should opt out, and at what point when they opt out should they start talking to you? Let's start with Simon.
So I suppose if you're thinking of opting out, depending on what size you are really, if you're exporting certainly more than 50% of your generated electricity, then you should consider opting out. Before you do that though, you would first need to go to some PPA providers or suppliers who will buy that electricity and find out what price they would offer you. And also, is there any additional costs in exporting that you're not aware of? And basically establish a cost-benefit scenario. So if they're giving you more than the 3.1, there may be other costs that would outweigh that potential benefit. So, kind of find out all the costs, all the benefits before you do it, and then make your decision.
Sorry, Tim, would you have anything?
I mean, the key thing with all this, and no matter what size of project you're looking at, there's two questions that come up time and time again. Is most of these arrangements are done over a long-term basis, and the question should be, the first one that comes into your mind is whether or not you opt in or opt out, is can you work with your chosen PPA provider for potentially 10 or 15 years? And then at that point you start having a discussion about how it works best for you. If you just look at the cold economics of it, your metering costs for a half-hour meter will cost you typically upwards of £350 a year. So whatever you do, that's your baseline cost. So opting it out of the deemed tariff, you've got to cover that cost as well. The other thing you've got to consider as well, you've got to cover your own time and effort. And it's great fun to do, and it's great fun to try and trade or negotiate with Ian or Simon about what price you should be seeing. But it still comes down to the cold hard economics. If you're going to make £10 above the deemed rate by taking into account your cost of your time and your metering cost, is it really worth it for the hassle factor? Obviously that gets a little bit more important the bigger the schemes, but certainly quite a few of the smaller schemes, even though theoretically they could have half-hourly meters and they could sell their own output under a contract with a supplier rather than the deemed tariff arrangements, it's not necessarily always worth it. So it's a very important discussion all the way through. Is sit down with your chosen supplier, whoever it is, or maybe two of them, and have a discussion and decide whether or not can you work with them for 15 years and 10 or 15 years, and then what is the value? And they will give you honest advice, because it's in nobody's interest to spend a lot of time chasing pennies here and there over the great scheme of things. So certainly at the smaller end, have that conversation. Wind, when it gets above a megawatt, maybe a megawatt and a half, then it becomes quite a different discussion, and there certainly is a lot of value. At the moment, feed-in tariff, exports deemed at 3.1 pence. Wholesale market price for power for the next 1 to 3 years is near a 5p. So there's a lot of opportunity between the two. Obviously, wind is not a baseload technology, so therefore you're not going to see the full wholesale price, but you're going to see more than threepence. And I think that's quite an important discussion at that point.
Yep, those points have been well made, and I'll just reiterate again that we just did a 100 kilowatt distinction. At 100 kilowatts and above, half-hourly metering is mandatory anyway. So half-hourly, if you're a 100 kilowatt site, you have to have that half-hourly metering. That's the cost you have to bear, and obviously you're getting to the sort of volumes involved with it. The cost is easier to hide in the overall model anyway. And then I guess going beyond that, the fact that you need to have that metering in the first place, whether you can get a decent PPA price, I guess, will depend on the volume and the profile of your export. If your generation is mainly for on-site use, you just happen to be spilling electric grid, you're probably not going to get much of an uplift under a PPA. But if you're exporting, all or most, or at certain times that they can command a higher price, peak times, for example, then certainly the PPA option over the long term is probably going to be very, very worthwhile indeed. It's also worth noting under a PPA, there are additional elements of value beyond just what we call the brown power price. Renewable projects also qualify for LECs, levy exemptions to certificates, which can also add a few pounds per megawatt hour, and also embedded benefits, which are not insignificant and which arise and vary depending on the voltage of your connection as well. So that they can all add a few percent, which is worth thinking about to the overall value of the power. But forgive me for just reserving my comments to the 100 kilowatt and above market, because that's the one I know about.
sorry, I'm taking my liberty here, but it'd be good just to clarify, there's been a number of issues here that have been raised about the different scales of project, and I think we're all sort of not quite clear on what the thresholds are in terms of where customers should be thinking about at what stage should they think about X rather than Y. I guess Ian's talking about 100 kilowatts, maybe Simon's talking more around 50 kilowatts, Tim just talked about 1.5 megawatts. Is there any sort of consistency here in terms of at what scale should you be thinking about different type of PPA deals?
Everyone have their own answers to this depending on what the particular business model is. But if you take the sort of the technology and the scale out of it, because obviously different technologies produce different load factors and so on. I guess the volume of power that you're actually putting onto the grid and the times of day that they come out are important. Because ultimately, if someone's giving you a PPA, the power purchaser is making a margin on the trade. So each power purchaser will have maybe a threshold above which it becomes interesting to them. So there might be some rules that each business would have around that, if that makes sense. So it's not, I'm not trying to dodge the question, but it does become site specific, and that's a way to think about it. At what stage does your volume of power to trade become attractive to power purchaser A or power purchaser B? And from their business model, they're looking at what is their basic, entry level return. At what point is it worth them getting out of bed for a PPA? Because actually, dealing with being a fit supplier is administratively quite burdensome. I'm sure Simon will agree, because Good Energy will probably deal with a much higher number of individual fit customers than we do. We deal with a small number of large fit sites, but we probably do a lot of the smaller domestic and the small scale commercial ones. And it's and suppliers themselves make nothing out of being a fit supplier. In fact, some of us possibly lose money on that. So the PPA stuff is the upside for the supplier as well.
Just going to make one point. It's probably a good use of a spreadsheet to actually sit down and work out your energy consumption. I mean, whenever you start on this path, if you're building a standalone generator in a field, hydro scheme, etc., and it's not linked to a premises that's consuming power, then you really should look, as a rule, at how you can best maximise the value of export. If you've got solar panels on a house or a wind turbine or something feeding into a business premises, a farm, for example, before it goes to the grid, then I'm afraid it is an exercise with a spreadsheet to figure out how much energy you're using on site and how much goes to the grid. Because whatever you use on site, you're getting the generation tariff, of course, for that, but also you're avoiding energy coming in. Now, if you look at your energy bill and what you're paying, it's probably near 11, 12, maybe 15 pence a kilowatt hour. So that's the first step to look at. Is always how much energy am I avoiding importing because I've gone for a generation technology, and then you look at the balance of how much is being exported. And at that point, you decide whether or not there's a significant amount of income to justify the hassle or the metering costs of looking at splitting out your or opting out of the mandatory 3.1 pence. Again, it's not dodging the question. It's more the fact that every single one of these installations is probably site specific in your own circumstances. And we've seen a number of such situations where I worked in the gas industry 20 years ago when they were doing the dash for gas and switching everything from electricity to gas-fired boilers instead of electricity immersions. We're starting to see the other way back now, where people are looking to try to maximise the on-site energy use, electricity use, by actually switching away from gas or propane to electrically heated elements again. So it's quite a strange world when you're actually looking to try and maximise your energy use on site rather than export to the grid.
I was just going to make a point that Tim just made really about exporting, and that's, as Tim correctly said, you could make 5p on an export by exporting that to the grid, but by using it on site, if you have that demand, you can save potentially 12p. So that's something to bear in mind. I think establishing the kind of scales everyone's at is kind of important. Is anyone looking at any schemes below 30 kilowatts where they're going to be exporting to the grid? Okay, that's fine then. Because above 30 kilowatts, it does get a bit more tricky because it's down to the export meter that you need. So any export sites above 30 kilowatts need half-hourly metering, which is pretty low, a low threshold considering that it's 100 kilowatts for import. And by installing the half-hourly meter, there's a lot of administration that you would need to do as well. It also increases the cost. So I think, as I said before, the key really is understanding all those costs up front. What are the implications? Do you need a contract for the meter itself? How do you know if you're exporting that amount? Maybe leave it a year and make sure that that's the export figure that you are exporting.
If you have several sites, is it worth trying to put one contract together, or should you try to do one contract for each site?
Sorry, it probably needs to be one contract per site because it depends where the yellow box is drawn round from Ofgem's purposes. But certainly, generically what happens with feed-in tariff is people try and maximise the tariff value, which is why you see maybe downsizing of generation compared to the resources available, i.e. smaller wind turbines or smaller hydro schemes going in. So generically it is probably better to keep the size, and also from an accreditation point of view. I know the accreditation is quite difficult.
Yeah, but if you've got sort of 4 sites in a county rather than 4 sites next to each one producing 1 megawatt, do you therefore try to do one contract for all 4 sites or separate ones?
Yeah, you'd have one negotiation with your supplier and probably end up with 4 contracts but only one negotiation. So you just negotiate one and then cut and paste it. That's probably the way.
I think it does depend. I think if they are in the same county, so they have the same postcode, or more specifically they're within the same DNO region, it would be possible to amalgamate those into one contract. We've done that in the past for generators, or we could offer 4 individual contracts, depending on what you wanted, basically, and what was possible.
I guess it's important to remember that the PPA agreement is something entirely separate from the feed-in tariff agreement. You could have your FIT getting paid to you by one supplier and a PPA with a completely different supplier. And obviously you're interested in the possibilities of getting a better deal by amalgamating, the output. And certainly if you're taking that all to one, PPA provider to enhance the deal, and that's fair enough. How the actual deal is put together, whether it's done by 4 different documents ultimately or something that works all together, it's all doable, and we certainly have PPAs with multi-site contracts.
Just to reinforce Ian's point there, don't think that you get your power from one company. You have to sign up with your FIT and register your FIT with that company, and neither do you then have to go and sell your power to that company. All those 3 different elements can all be done independently, separately, and you can negotiate the best deal. So it's very important to bear in mind there are perhaps, and as Simon might say this, there are administrative overheads in renegotiating each of those separately, and there could be benefits with some people will only buy your power if you are a customer of theirs, and will try and tie you in. So there are issues with suggesting that, but certainly technically, and I'm guessing with a number of these guys, they would probably be quite happy to sign you up, even though you weren't a customer either of the FIT or actually of a power their power supply.
If I'm supplying energy and cannot use it ourselves, but have 1 or 2 near neighbors who can, is that doable? And indeed, how many near neighbors, I'm talking about industrial use customers, how many, well, first of all, can you do that, and how many could you supply to, and how complicated is that?
Okay.
I'll ask a rather naughty question back to you. Is how well do you get on with your near neighbours? I mean, that's what it comes down to. If you
Pretty well.
That's good. There's a rule of thumb with any generation. If you're talking about schemes that are non-utility scale, no matter what the technology is, that there's a simple rule of thumb that says how much energy can I use myself, how much can I sell to my neighbours, and then how much do I export? Because that's the value chain. So use as much as you can yourself. Obviously, being responsible, not just wasting it willy-nilly. Your neighbours as well. I mean, a private wire across a field to them would supply them. You've got to consider then about backup supplies and what happens if your generation stops and how they get the power. But again, it's probably feasible. You might have to sell electricity to them slightly cheaper than they were buying it in from the grid, but again, that's still above what you would get from exporting it. And then the next question is whatever's left, push out in the grid. I come from a farming family. My parents get on very well with their neighbours and fellow farmers. They still have spats and falling outs and don't talk to each other for years, although they still get on very well with each other. So that's always the thing about it. Whenever it's the same as dealing with a feed-in tariff or any supplier, any PPA provider, it's a long-term investment. You've got to get on with everybody for that full term. Or if you don't, you've got to at least have a contractual position that you can just live with going through it. So it's a good opportunity. Just need to have a think about how it's structured and what happens if that person you're selling power to falls away for whatever reason. They leave, the business stops, you annoy them somehow, and you have a falling out. And that's the sort of things you're looking at.
Going can I extend this as well? Going beyond that initial point, it depends how near those near neighbours are. If you can't send, put a private wire to them, there's also a cost involved in that which you have to factor in. But if you're talking with someone who's near, they're a couple of miles away, and the power has to go onto the grid and then come off again, then they might as well be at the other end of the country, because you then start to incur the costs of using the system and things get much more complicated. Again, that is doable and it does operate in the marketplace, probably at a much larger scale fits, or even beyond that. That's a whole different ball game if you are talking about selling to someone via the grid. Just in case that was the intention of your question as well.
Yeah, just to say, I suppose, that we do have a number of generators at Good Energy that are doing a similar thing. They're a PPA customer of ours, and the neighbours in question have also signed up to a Good Energy tariff for their supply. So in that scenario, we basically net one off against the other and do it that way. That's also another way you could do it.
Okay, I just want to make a quick point as well, as related. We actually find that there are customers out there that are, for example, put in a turbine, but the location of the turbine is optimised for maximising the return from the wind resource. That is not an optimum location for connecting their power generation to where they actually use the power. And that, of course, introduces a fairly major problem. As the guy said, ideally you want to consume as much as you possibly can, but in some cases the extra cost, even in digging cables and putting in copper wire, are so high that actually it rules out the ability to use the power in the way that you want it, and you end up having to export the vast majority of your power, or in fact all of your power, back onto the grid. So even in situations where you have a farm with a high wind resource and a high consumption, but for example the high wind resource is at the top of the hill and the consumption is down the bottom of the hill quite a distance away, you may find that actually it's really practically and technically quite difficult to utilise and consume the power that you generate, and that should be a factor to consider. And I guess there's a sort of follow-up question: which should you offset? How much should you for example, re-site your turbine down the hill, lose out on your returns from your wind resource in order to make sure that you maximise your consumption? And I think that's a question I'm guessing the guys would probably say is a site-specific issue and would have to be something that they talk about in some detail on your site. But I think as electricity prices inexorably rise, the consideration to use as much of it as you possibly can on site is going to increase.
Most projects, or a lot of projects, involve finance in some way from various institutions. I wonder if you could comment on the influence or changes required by lenders, and maybe to a PPA or to the sale of power, and maybe distinguish between project finance and unsecured finance.
Sorry. Just before they answer that, just so everyone gets it, if your project is involving a bank loan of some kind, then it's likely that the bank will want a very significant influence over who you sell your power to, and you will not have free rein to go out to potentially the entire market of whatever 20-25 companies out there who are interested in buying your power. Your bank will say, no, you have to go to X, Y or Z. And I think, is that fair to say, Mark?
Yeah, and the kind of do they push certain things in a certain direction? Are there changes that they want?
I think the answer's already been good. Actually, the bank will tell you what to do. There's no real getting away from it. Some banks are better at telling you to do less than others, but they're the guys putting the money in. They expect to see their money back after 10 years, typically. They want to see it back with interest, and they want to make sure you have enough money in the project to cover downside, low generation yields, low power prices, things like that. So the bank will request a certain number of things. Maybe they may take a view at the smaller end, but certainly as you get, if the bank is lending more than $250,000 to a project, even some of the smaller investment banks into that smaller micro renewables end, they will still look to make sure they securitise their revenues, and that very well may mean they will step into the project if you default and take that project over and take it away from you. Certainly once you get bigger scale projects, the bank drives it for the first 10-15 years until they're out, and then it becomes your project again. So a lot of the contracting decisions and who you can contract with are driven by the bank and their view, and the view of the off-taker, the power purchase provider, potentially whether or not they're going to be there for 5, 10, 15 years. And they might instruct you that even though some people in the market are offering very good prices, they may very well turn around and say we don't think they're going to be here for 10 years or 5 years, and therefore our money is at risk, and therefore we'll tell you these are the people you contract with.
The feed-in tariff scale with pure project finance, which is what Tim's been talking about, it's interesting to see the evolution of the there's only a couple of banks that are main players in that, the evolution of their thinking, because what the FIT gives them is a guaranteed, supposedly underwritten by legislation, government floor with the feed-in tariff. So they will, if they can model the project on the feed-in tariff, including the export tariff alone, and it works, then they can become relatively more relaxed. And what you can get through a PPA then gives a bit of financial upside. So if they know that they may take a slightly more relaxed approach to it, albeit that they're still quite keen to see as long-term a PPA in place as possible. For those that are being financed, just security taking over a farm, for example, those particular lenders don't seem to have the least bit of interest in what the PPA does, because they've got their security through a more traditional route. So the differences are quite distinct. They just leave the PPA arrangements purely in the hands of the generator to get the best deal that they think they can get, whether it's long or short term.
Just to add, I suppose that banks certainly will want to have a say in who you choose as your PPA provider. They'd want to be happy with them. Generally, I suppose banks tend to have more say in the contract negotiations, so they want different clauses in the contract. Step-in agreements, as Tim said, are very common. Financiers such as pension funds tend to want longer contract terms, so 15 years at least is very common for projects that we have that are funded by pension funds specifically.
Are there any sort of nitty-gritty details in PPA contracts that people should be aware about before they enter into these agreements? So there are things that they need to really be aware of in terms of, for example, maintaining their equipment in full working order, and making sure that it's regularly serviced, and they accept the costs of warranty agreements and servicing agreements before they enter into a PPA.
To that one. First of all, if you're entering into a PPA with a power purchaser who is offering you a fixed price for a certain forward period, then that PPA provider will be sort of forward selling the power by hedging it in the marketplace. Thereby, they will have an expectation on the volume and profile of the power that you're expecting to deliver based on the initial forecasts, wind yield reports, whatever that you were able to give them. So, once you sign a PPA, you're transferring all the risk that you might have had for the availability of your output onto the power purchaser. They carry that risk for you, and that I guess the cost of that is built into the PPA price that you get. So it's quite right that PPA provider would expect you contractually to operate your plant continuously under good industry practice and so on, maintain O&M agreements in place, that kind of thing, and also have obligations on forecasting and reforecasting, reporting outages, planned or unplanned, that sort of thing. And also we're all, each of us fairly substantial traders of electricity. We have portfolios that we deal with, so one other fit-scale project isn't going to, there's a little bit of noise in the portfolio, but we still, it all adds up to a big sum, so there are absolutely some fairly, understandable contractual obligations along those lines.
I was just going to add, you'll have a general obligation to act as a reasonable and prudent operator, which generally means what's reasonable, so you maintain it. As Ian said, there will be clauses under any PPA to act that, and those vary depending on the PPA provider, and will be enforced or not enforced again depending on the PPA provider. I think that the key thing to bear in mind is if you've got any form of third-party money in the scheme, that third-party provider, be it a bank or a pension scheme, will require you to operate and maintain the equipment to the right standard. If you don't, you'll be in breach, and as soon as you're in breach or default, they could step into the project. So the risk is not necessarily with the off-taker. As Ian said, we could probably live with you being a bit erratic with maintenance and such alike. It's not quite the end of the world, but for if you start breaching or defaulting on your terms of your loan or such like that, then it becomes quite a big issue because the bank will step in. I think that's the more important one to look at with any obligations you may have regarding maintenance or operations in general.
No, there were the 2 points I was going to raise, so yes.
I've got a last question for the panel, just to go down each of you. What factors, if I was a generator, should I consider when I'm selecting my power purchaser? What are the key things I should be asking you in terms of how I make my choice?
So obviously price is a very important one, and it's essentially the main priority for a lot of people we talk to. Typically they've just about to or just spent a lot of money on their generator, and they want to see the money start to come back in. But I suppose also flexibility of terms and service is also a key one. You may be entering a contract with them for 5 years, so choosing a supplier that operates a good service as well as a good price is important. Can you get them on the phone? How quick are they at responding to you? Do they sort out your problems? All of that kind of thing I think is very important.
I was going to say generally the same thing. I still go back to the point I made a little while ago. Look at the people who are buying your power potentially. You've got to work with them for a long amount of time. Can you get on with them in times of good and times of bad? I think that's the key thing. Then you look at second order things such as price. Price is obviously very important. As I said, always with feed-in tariffs, speak to your local distribution or the old distribution company, for example Scottish Hydro up here, get a price for their feed-in tariff offer for yours, and then go and talk to other guys in the market, particularly two sat either side of me, and then look them in the eyes and decide which of them you prefer to work with over a long period of time.
I'll just try and say the same thing in different words. I mean, I think you could, they say we're in a commodities marketplace, price is price, But you can sum up, I guess, what's been said already just in terms of the relationship. Okay, certainly for any PPA that's for a project of anything more than a few hundred kilowatts, the chances are that before we sign a deal, there's a good chance that I've been speaking to the potential counterparty for probably an average of 2 years before a deal is done. So a relationship is developing there anyway. You know, hopefully you build up a level of understanding and trust and so on. There's a lot of work that's done before the deal is done, and then, as has been said, that relationship will hopefully be a mutually beneficial long-term one.
Okay, we've had our hour. I really would like to thank the three guys next to me. We contacted them literally about a week ago, and they've all signed up and come along and given us the time. They really are experts in this area, I can assure you. So you've had advice from the best possible people, and thank you very much, the three of you, for making the effort to come and share your knowledge with us. Again, as I said, we're trying to write part 2 of our article on selling your power. We're going to be inviting these guys to feed into that article and contribute to some other points around this whole area. So do keep an eye on the website and ideally sign up and subscribe to it. And thank you very much indeed for attending.